You know, sometimes all it takes is the smell of a warm apple pie, fresh out of the oven, and suddenly, I'm right back in 1961. Funny, isn't it? One moment you're standing in your kitchen, fussing over pie crust, and the next, you're 19 again, with a borrowed dress and a heart full of maybes. It was a Saturday afternoon, mid-October, I believe, the kind of day when the sun was tired but still golden. I was baking in Mama's kitchen, not because I loved to bake back then, Lord no, but because that's what girls did in those days. We stirred, we smiled, we served. That was just the way things were back then. And as I stood there, my hands deep in flour and cinnamon, the radio crackled to life with Patsy Cline singing Crazy. That voice, oh that voice, still gets me every time. I remember looking out the window at the cornfield stretching to the sky, and something in me ached. Not the kind of ache you can put a name to, more like a question that hasn't found its words yet. That ache never left, you know. I just got good at tucking it under aprons and smiles. I'll tell you what, lately I've been remembering things I hadn't thought about in decades. And not the big, loud memories, no, those are easy. I mean the soft ones, the quiet corners. Like the way my husband used to scrape frost off my windshield in the dark without ever saying a word. Or how my little boy used to leave dandelions on the kitchen table, thinking they were fancy flowers. He's gone now. Vietnam took him, and a piece of me too. But Lord have mercy, the memories don't die with the people. They just sit in the quiet, waiting for you to slow down enough to hear Anne. Today I opened that old drawer in the hallway, the one with the stuck handle, and found my typewriter ribbons. The ones from when I first started writing. I guess I wanted to remember how it felt to say something for no one but me. And wouldn't you know it, that drawer was like a time machine. I sat down, pressed a key, and it was like unlocking a door I'd kept bolted shut for years. There's a story I've kept to myself for a long, long time. Not because I was ashamed of it. No, ma'am. But because I didn't think anyone'd care to hear it. I used to believe you had to be somebody for your story to matter. But now I know, if it matters to you, it matters. That's all there is to it. So here I am, 83 years old, hands a little shaky, heart still strong, and I've got 5 things I want to tell you. 5 lessons I learned far too late, but just in time to change everything. And maybe, just maybe, they'll mean something to you too. This ain't a sermon, and it sure ain't advice. I've given up more than enough of that in my day. No, darlin', this is just me talkin'. A woman who loved hard, lost quiet, and finally figured out how to live a little for herself. Took me most of my life, but like I always say, better late than never, and even better with pie. Now go on and sit with me a while. There's something I need to share. I grew up where the wind never sat still. Out in the flatlands near Hutchinson, Kansas, just me, my brothers, and a world made of wheat, dust, and prayer. We lived in a white clapboard house with creaky floors and a tin roof that sang when it rained. Daddy called it humble, but Mama always said it had good bones. Back then, the days were slow and the nights were filled with the hum of crickets and the soft crackle of the radio set in on the windowsill. We didn't have much, Lord knows we didn't, but we made do with what we had. That was just the way things were. I was a quiet child, the middle one. Not too bold, not too soft. I liked sitting on the porch steps with my knees pulled up, listening to Mama hum hymns as she hung clothes on the line. I can still see her hands, strong, sun-browned, always moving. She believed in hard work and never cried in front of us, no matter how tight the times got. Daddy worked in town at the grain elevator, and when he came home, the screen door'd slam, and we'd all look up like it was Christmas. He didn't say much, but when he laughed, it was the kind of sound that made your heart swell. We had chores, of course, chickens, garden, helping Mama can peaches in that hot little kitchen. But there was room for dreams too. Mine were small and quiet. I wanted to write. I'd sit with a stub of pencil and old paper socks from the mercantile and scribble stories about faraway places, girls who wore silk dresses and lived by the sea. I didn't even know what the sea smelled like, but I imagined it was something soft and free. I never told anyone about those stories. It felt silly, selfish even. Girls like me didn't dream big. We dreamed practical. I was 13 when I first heard the word ambition. One of the older girls in Sunday school said it like it was a sin. I remember thinking, maybe it was. Maybe good girls didn't want more than what was given. So I folded those dreams up like handkerchiefs and tucked them away, deep in a drawer I didn't open for years. Instead, I learned to smile pretty, to say, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir," to be agreeable. That's what girls were taught. Be kind, be quiet, be grateful. But I'll tell you what, I still remember the way my heart used to race when I opened a book. That was the one place I didn't have to be small. I'd lie on the floor in front of the fan, the pages flapping like wings, and feel like maybe, just maybe, I could be more than what the world expected of me. But even then, I figured that kind of life was for other folks. Folks with money, with time. Folks who weren't trying to stretch one chicken into 3 meals. When I was 16, I met Robert Whitaker at a church picnic. He had a crooked smile and hands that looked like they'd built things. He asked if he could sit next to me on the hayride, and that was that. We married 3 years later. I wore my sister's old dress, and my bouquet was made of wildflowers from the field behind our house. I wasn't scared, not because I was sure, but because back then, marriage was just what came next. That's how we did it in those days. Looking back now, I think I truly believe life would sort itself out if I just followed the rules. Be good, be useful, be patient, and always put everyone else first. I thought that was love. I thought that was enough. I didn't know yet that some dreams don't die, they just get quiet. I didn't know that kindness without boundaries becomes a cage, and I surely didn't know that someday I'd sit in the same creaky chair, 80-some years old, wondering why I waited so long to ask myself what I wanted. But I did believe in goodness. And I believed that people always came back. That if you loved them right, they'd stay. Or at least, remember. And maybe, just maybe, that's where my story really began. I still remember the sound of it. 3 gentle knocks on our front door, just before supper. It was early spring, maybe 59, when the air still had a chill, but the trees had started whispering about blossoms. I was 17, helping Mama slice potatoes in the kitchen when we heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Not rushed, not loud. Just polite. The kind of knock that made you stand up straighter without knowing why. Mama wiped her hands on her apron and nodded at me to answer. I still don't know what made my heart start up like that. Maybe it was the quiet before it, or maybe some part of me already knew. Life was about to shift. On the other side of the screen door stood a woman I'd never seen before. She was tall, thin, wore her silver-streaked hair in a braid like a rope slung over one shoulder. Her dress was plain, but her eyes land six alive. Her eyes were something else. Sharp, but soft, like she'd seen the whole world and still wanted to sit for tea. She smiled and said, "Is this the Whitaker place?" I nodded. She introduced herself as Miss Adeline Brooks. Said she'd just moved into the old Barlow house down the road, the one that had been empty so long folks thought it haunted. She was looking for eggs, she said. Heard Mama kept chickens. Mama stepped out, they talked polite, and I just stood there, talking her in. There was something about her, a kind of ease, like she didn't owe the world a single apology. She glanced at me, and I swear she saw straight through the polite smile I'd been wearing since I was 10. She said, "You a reader?" I nodded. A writer, too. I bet, she said. And Lord help me, I blushed so hard I thought my ears'd catch fire. No one had ever said that to me before. Heck, no one even knew I wrote. But she saw it, right there on my face or maybe in my hands. After that day, she came by often. Brought over rhubarb jam or borrowed sugar she didn't really need. And little by little, she started talking about books, about cities she'd lived in: New Orleans, Denver, San Francisco. She'd been a teacher too, back before the war, and then a nurse, and then, would you believe it, a poet. Published and everything. She had a way of speaking that made the air feel richer, like every word she said planted something in the dirt. I'd never met a woman who didn't wrap herself in apologies. She wasn't mean, just honest. Straight's fine. Free. One day, she handed me a notebook. Said, write it down. Whatever's rattling in that head of yours, don't let it go to waste. I told her I didn't have anything important to say. She looked at me, long and still, then said, well, that's a damn lie. I laughed, partly from surprise, partly because no one'd ever spoken to me like that. Not as a girl, not as someone who could matter. That night, I sat by the window with that notebook in my lap and listened to the coyotes cry in the distance. I didn't write anything, not yet, but I held it like it was something sacred, and for the first time in my life, I let myself wonder what it'd be like to be someone different. Not instead of myself, but more of myself. Bigger. I couldn't explain why, but my chest felt tight for days. Like my heart was stretching its arms for the first time in years. I still helped Mama, still cooked and cleaned and smiled pretty. But something inside had shifted. A crack in the wall I'd built without even knowing. Miss Adeline stayed in our town just 2 years before moving on again. Said she had wandering in her bones. But before she left, she gave me her old typewriter, heavy, black, keys like teeth. I kept it under my bed for decades, pulling it out in the quiet hours when the kids were asleep and the house was still. You young folks wouldn't understand, but back then, a gift like that, it wasn't just metal and ribbon. It was permission. It was a door. And I suppose that knock on our door, that was the moment my life tilted. Just a little, but enough. It wasn't long after Miss Adeline left that the walls started closing in again. You'd think a little notebook and an old typewriter would be enough to hold a dream open. But life, well, life don't work like that. I married Robert that summer. 19, barely a woman, wearing borrowed lace and a smile that didn't reach all the way to my eyes. Don't get me wrong, Robert was a good man. Honest. Worked with his hands, fixed what broke, showed up on time, always. But he didn't ask questions, not the kind that mattered. He never asked what I wanted, and truth be told, I didn't expect him to. That just wasn't the way of things. We moved into a small house near his folks. 3 rooms and a porch. The wallpaper was yellow and peeling, the floors scuffed, but I made it a home. I hung curtains, kept things tidy, learned how to stretch a roast. I smiled when the neighbors dropped by. I smiled when I burned dinner. I smiled when I cried in the pantry, quiet as I could so no one would hear. You see, back then, sadness was something you swept under the rug, right next to the crumbs and the things you didn't dare name. Then the babies came, first Clara, then June and little Bobby. And with each one, I gave away pieces of myself like they were old buttons. A little more time, a little more sleep, a little more space in my mind. I love them, Lord. I love them fierce. But I started disappearing in the loving. Days turned to years, and the typewriter gathered dust under the bed. I remember once, when Bobby was just a baby, I pulled it out. I sat down in the kitchen with a cup of weak coffee and a candle flickering low, trying to write something, anything, that was mine. but the words wouldn't come. My hands trembled, not from age, but from fear. What if nothing came out? Or worse, what if something did and I couldn't bear it? That's the thing they don't tell you about silence. It doesn't just hush your voice, it chokes your thoughts, too. And when you've spent your whole life trying to be small and agreeable, speaking up starts to feel like a betrayal. Robert. Well, he wasn't cruel, but he didn't get it. When he saw me at that table, typing with my brows all furrowed, he asked, "What you writing now? Recipes?" I laughed along with him, but it burned. I wanted to scream no. I'm writing myself back into my own story. But I didn't. I just tucked the page away and made supper. Then came the war. Vietnam. Bobby was barely 9 when the letter came saying my oldest, Daniel, was gone. Killed in action, they said. Quick. Clean. As if any of that mattered. I folded that telegram and pressed it between 2 Bible pages and didn't open my mouth for 3 days. Folks brought casseroles and prayers, but no one brought what I needed, permission to fall apart. I remember standing in the shower, water running cold, bit in my lip hard enough to bruise just so I wouldn't scream. Not because I was afraid of what the neighbors think, but because I was afraid that once the scream came, it'd never stop. I carried that grief like a brick in my apron pocket, and I got real good at pretending it wasn't there. The worst part? I never gave myself permission to hurt. I told myself I had to be strong for the girls, for Robert, for the church, for everyone but me. And let me tell you something, when you live that way too long, your soul starts to shrink. Like a dress left out in the sun too many seasons. It fades. It tightens. It stops feeling like it fits. I kept asking myself, is this what life is supposed to be? Is this all I get? But even that felt like a sin. Who was I to want more? I had a roof, I had food, I had a family. I should have been grateful. That's what they'd say. That's what I told myself. But deep down, real deep, something was stirring. A question. A whisper. A quiet rebellion that started the day Miss Adeline knocked on our door. And though I didn't know it yet, it would grow. Because one day, I'd stop being sorry for wanting more. I remember the sound first. Not the kind that echoes, but the kind that sinks a heavy and dull, like something breaking inside you real quiet. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late March. The house was too still. You know the kind of stillness? Where even the wind outside feels like it's waiting. I was standing at the sink, watching the suds float in a bowl, when the phone rang. Long and sharp, 3 times. That was the way it rang when it was bad news. Our line, our number, our pain. June answered it. I could hear her voice go flat. "Mama," that's all she said. And I knew. It wasn't just the words that followed. It was the way the floor seemed to tilt, the way the light in the room changed. My baby, my Bobby, 23, stationed overseas. Gone. Not in combat, not like his brother. No, this time it was a truck. A roadside accident. Just gone. A freak thing, they called it. One moment he was writing a letter home, and the next nothing. I dropped the bowl, and it shattered across the tiles. But I didn't hear it. I didn't hear anything after that, not for a long time. I remember the wall clock stopping. I swear it did. Right at 2:17. The second hand just quit, and I stared at it like it held the answer to why the world could be so cruel to a woman who'd already given so much. I sat down on the kitchen floor, right in the middle of those broken pieces, apron soaked through, water and glass all around me. I sat there and I couldn't move, couldn't cry, couldn't even pray. And let me tell you, when a woman like me can't pray, you know something inside her has been knocked clean loose. Robert came in later, said nothing. He put a hand on my shoulder and left it there. He didn't speak, but I could feel him saying it, hold it together, Mavis. And Lord forgive me, I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, why is it always me who has to hold? Why is it always the mothers who are expected to keep the walls up when the house is on fire? That night, I sat alone in the laundry room, the only place no one came looking. I pulled out Bobby's last letter, crumpled from reading. Mama, he'd written, when I get back, you and me are gonna take a trip. Just us. Maybe see the ocean, finally. He'd drawn a little doodle of 2 stick figures holding hands, looking at the waves. And I lost it. Full body, soul-ripping sobs. The kind that scrape your insides. I wept for Bobby. I wept for Daniel. I wept for the girl I used to be, the one who wrote stories in grocery bags and waited for someone to tell her it was okay to want more. And then, somewhere between breathing and breaking, I whispered, I can't do this anymore. Not like this. Not living for everyone but me. Not smiling through empty rooms. Not wearing a good wife's silence like it was a crown. I wasn't sure what came next. I didn't have a plan, but I did have a need. A deep, aching, holy kind of need to live differently. To take that damn typewriter and pound out every word I'd swallowed since I was 12. To mourn out loud. To scream if I had to finally put my name at the top of the list. That night, I stood up. I washed my face. I swept up the glass. And I took the typewriter out of the attic. Because grief carves you. It doesn't just hurt, it hollows. But that hollow, if you let it can be filled with something new. That's the night I changed. That's the night I stopped being everybody's mother and started being my own woman. After Bobby died, the world didn't stop, and that was the cruelest part. The sun still rose the next morning, just like always, as if it didn't know what it had done. As if it hadn't ripped the breath out of a mother's lungs. I remember sitting on the porch, coffee gone cold in my hands, watching the wind move through the cornfields like nothing had happened. It made me angry how ordinary it all felt. Birds chirping, dogs barking, June handing laundry like it was any other Tuesday. But inside me, it was winter. And it stayed winter for a long, long time. I moved through the days like a shadow of myself. I did the things I was supposed to, cooked meals, folded sheets, answered the phone when it rang. I nodded when folks talked and even managed to smile sometimes. But I wasn't really there. Not fully. I'd look in the mirror and see someone I used to know, but couldn't quite name. She looked like me, but quieter, smaller, hollowed. Robert. Well, he went back to fixin' things around the house. That's how he grieved with his hands. He patched the roof, repaired the porch swing, kept busy like if he stopped moving, he'd drown. And maybe you would have. We didn't talk about Bobby much. Didn't talk about Daniel either. Not because we didn't love them, Lord knows we did, but because the pain was too sharp to hold between us. So we each held it alone. Him with his hammers, me with my silence. I stopped going to church for a while. Couldn't bring myself to sit in that pew and listen to sermons about grace when I felt like the heavens had gone deaf. I didn't stop believing in God, not exactly. But I stopped expecting answers. I'd pray, but it felt more like whispering into a canyon. My faith didn't disappear. It just changed shape, got quieter, sadder, like an old quilt you keep not because it warms you, but because it remembers. The typewriter sat on the table like a dare. I'd look at it every day, but couldn't bring myself to touch the keys. I was scared, not of writing, but of what might come out. What if all I had left was grief? What if I was too late to become whoever I was meant to be? I'd wasted so much time taking care of everyone else, I didn't know where to begin with myself. Some days, I'd sit by the window and watch the road. Part of me hoping Miss Adeline might just wander back in like she did all those years ago. Tell me what to do next. Give me permission. But she never came. Nobody did. And that's when I realized there wasn't gonna be a rescue. No knock on the door. No moment where someone hands you your life back and says, "Here you go, darlin'. Try again." I had to rescue myself. But that realization didn't come with fireworks. It came slow. Like the wind. Like spring after a long freeze, one small drip at a time. I started taking walks. Short ones at first. Around the yard, then down the road. I'd sit in the garden with a notebook in my lap and just breathe. Not write. Just breathe. Let the wind blow through me. Let the silence be mine instead of a punishment. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But I was aware. Aware that something in me had shifted again. Not back to what I was, that woman was gone, but forward into someone quieter, sadder, maybe, wiser. I still missed my boys every single day. I still do. That kind of loss carves deep. But grief, I learned, doesn't ask permission. And it don't follow rules. You just carry it like an old song. Some days it plays louder. Some days it's just background. But it never stops humming. And somehow I kept going. One breath. One word. One small step at a time. It didn't happen all at once, you know. There wasn't a grand moment. No heavenly light pouring through the window or angel choir singing. No, ma'am. It came quiet. Like everything important ever does. It was a Tuesday again. Always seems to be a Tuesday. And I was out in the yard, pulling weeds from the old herb bed I'd let go wild for years. The dirt was dry and stubborn, and my knees weren't what they used to be. But there I was, hands deep in earth, breathing for the first time in what felt like months. And that's when Clara pulled up, my oldest girl, looking all flustered and out of breath. She had her youngest with her, little Daisy, who was 4 at the time and all curls and questions. "Mama," Clara said, "can you watch her just a couple hours? I've got a doctor's appointment, and I can't take her with me." I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid. Afraid of what it meant to be needed again. Afraid of feeling anything at all. But I looked at Daisy, barefoot, sticky with popsicle, holding a dandelion like it was gold, and I nodded. She ran to me, arms wide, and said, "Grandma, tell me a story." And I did. We sat under the porch awning, her on my lap, the typewriter still on the table beside us like an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. I told her about the turtle I found in the creek when I was a girl, about how I named it Percy and gave it a lettuce leaf every day until it wandered off. She listened like it was the most important tale in the world. When I finished, she looked at me with those big eyes and said, "You should write that down." Something about the way she said it made me go still. That night, after Clara picked her up and the house fell quiet again, I sat down at that typewriter. It took me a minute to remember how to thread the ribbon. The keys were stiff from sitting, but I put in a fresh page. I stared at the blank space for a long while. And then, without really meaning to, I started typing. Not for anyone else. Not to prove something. Just to see if I still could. I wrote about the turtle. I wrote about the creek, about the smell of wet grass and the way summer sounded in 1954. I wrote about Percy, and I wrote about me. And when I finished that first page, I cried. Not from sadness, not even from joy, but from relief, like breathing after holding it for years. That was the first of many pages. Over the next few weeks, I wrote every day. Little pieces at first, stories, memories, recipes with notes in the margins. And when I felt brave, I started writing poems. Not good ones, maybe, but mine, honest, raw, real. And it felt like opening a window in a room I didn't know had gone dark. I started sending them to a little online forum for older writers. My grandson helped me set it up. showed me how to click submit and everything. I didn't expect anyone to read them, let alone reply. But they did, and one message I'll never forget. A woman from Ohio wrote, "You said what I've been too afraid to say." And that, darling, that was the moment I knew I wasn't invisible anymore. Grief hadn't left me. The holes in my heart were still there, sure, but I'd begun planting wildflowers in them. I'd started speaking again, not with my mouth, but with my soul. And every word I wrote was a kind of stitch, a mending. I still didn't have all the answers, but I had a pen, a page, and a little girl who reminded me that stories, even the small, tender ones, matter. Sometimes, second chances don't look like fireworks. Sometimes, they look like dirt under your nails, or a child's voice saying, "Tell me a story." And if you listen real close, sometimes they sound like your own voice finally coming home. There was a time, I'll be honest with you, when I carried my grudges like a sack of stones. Heavy, sharp, impossible to set down without feeling the ache in my shoulders. I held on to things I shouldn't have. Old hurts. Harsh words said and unsaid. Especially with Mama. We never had a perfect mother-daughter dance, if you know what I mean. There was love, sure, but also silence and disappointment and years of things left unsaid. I carried that weight for over 40 years. 40 years of carrying, a burden that only made me smaller. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted my kitchen walls gold, something inside me shifted. I was looking at her faded photograph, Mama, young and strong, with eyes full of storms and prayers. And I thought, land sakes alive, what have I been doing to myself all these years? I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to do my writing, and whispered to the empty room, "I forgive you, Mama. And I forgive me too." I didn't say it out loud, mind you, just in my head. But Lord have mercy, it felt like a floodgate breaking. It wasn't about forgetting the past. No, ma'am. It was about setting it free. About letting the pain be what it was, not the whole story. Because for years, I let that hurt define me, let it cage me. But I decided then and there, I wasn't gonna live like that anymore. I threw out the old letters I'd kept, the ones filled with flame and bitterness. I gave away the things that reminded me of the grudges I carried. It felt like cleansing a wound that never healed properly. I felt lighter, not because the pain disappeared, but because I wasn't dragging it behind me like a sack of rocks anymore. From that day on, I chose to live differently. I chose grace over resentment. I chose hope over bitterness. That choice didn't erase the hard parts of my life, the loss, the mistakes, the heartbreak, but it gave me room to breathe, to heal, to be. And with that space, I found peace. Quiet, steady peace. The kind that lets you look in the mirror and see not just your scars, but the strength it took to carry them. I became someone who could say, I am more than my pain. That decision changed everything. It didn't fix the past, but it freed my future. I started writing not just for my grandkids or for strangers on the internet, but for me, for the woman who deserved kindness, especially from herself. I'm not perfect. I'm not done learning, but I'm here, living, loving, forgiving, and maybe that's enough. You know, life isn't about holding on to everything that ever hurt us. Sometimes it's about letting go, and that's how I chose to live free, gentle, and with a heart willing to keep beating. Because, darling, that's the only way to truly move forward. You know, looking back over all these years, all the joy and the pain, the losses and the little victories, there's one thing that's settled deep in my bones. It ain't some grand sermon or a tidy piece of advice to write on a card. No, it's a quiet truth that's taken me a lifetime to understand. And here it is. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't hold the door open until you find your courage. It just keeps moving, whether you're ready or not. Back in my day, a woman's dreams were often whispered in the dark, tucked away behind duties and expectations. I thought I had to shrink myself down to fit into the spaces carved out by others: a good wife, a patient mother, a quiet soul who didn't rock the boat. I thought ambition was loud and greedy, something to hide under my pillow like a secret sin. But that's not true. Not really. Ambition, real ambition, is gentle but persistent. It's the small flame that keeps burning inside you, even when the wind blows hard. I learned that the hard way. I waited too long to put myself first, to say what I wanted out loud, to chase those quiet dreams I'd buried. I thought my time had passed, that I was too old, too tired, too much just the way things are. But here's what I found: it's never too late. Never too late to start writing your own story, to speak your truth, to find your joy. The clock doesn't run out on us until we say so. Maybe that's the biggest lesson I can give. Don't wait. Don't wait for the perfect moment, the right time, or someone else's permission. You young folks might think you've got all the time in the world, but even so, don't waste a single breath second-guessing what you deserve. And if you're my age or older, don't believe for a second that your story's over. It's just getting interesting. I hope that my story, my stumbling and rising, shows you that survival isn't about strength alone. It's about kindness to others, yes, but most of all to yourself. It's about letting go of the shame that keeps us small, the fears that hold us back, and the pain that makes us silent. It's about choosing to live your life on your terms, even if it's just one small step at a time. So maybe it's time for you too to stop waiting. Stop wondering if you're ready or good enough or worthy. Because you are. You are more than enough. And your dreams, whatever they are, deserve to see the light. I'll tell you what, life can be messy and hard, full of heartbreak and missed chances. But it's also full of surprises, of quiet mornings with coffee and the scent of pie baking, of children's laughter and the stories we leave behind, of the little moments where you find yourself again and again and again. That's the truth I hold close, and the one I hope you carry with you. Because if there's one thing I know for sure, it's this: you don't have to be perfect to be remarkable. You just have to be brave enough to try. Well, darling, here we are at the end of my little story, or maybe just the beginning, if you take it to heart the way I hope you will. You see, this isn't just about a life lived long ago in the dusty fields of Kansas. It's about today. It's about the moments you're living right now, the choices you're making, the dreams you're holding close or shoving away. I want you to think for a minute. When you hear the word love, what do you see? Is it grand gestures, fireworks, and promises shouted to the skies? Or is it the quiet things, the steady hands that hold you through the storm, the warm cup of coffee left on the table, the way someone checks if your car is warm on a cold morning? That's what love looked like for me. Not perfect, not always spoken, but they're all the same. And here's a question I've asked myself more times than I can count. Does true love really come back? You know, the kind that lingers, even when the years have passed and the people change. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the night stretches on, I swear I can feel it. Like a soft whisper in the breeze or the flicker of a memory on the wall. And sometimes I wonder if that love, the kind that's quieter than a song but deeper than any ocean, never really leaves. What do you think? Is love something that fades like the sunset, or does it circle back like the seasons? I'd love to hear what you believe, because stories like mine aren't just about the past, they're about what we carry with us, the lessons we hold on to, and the hope we keep alive for tomorrow. Maybe you've got your own stories tucked away, stories of loss, of waiting, of finding yourself after all the world told you who to be. Maybe you're still sitting on that porch somewhere, watching the shadows grow long and wondering if it's too late to write your own next chapter. I want you to know it's never too late. Not ever. I'm 83 now. I've baked more pies than I can count, told more stories than I can remember, and loved with every part of me. And though I carry my losses like old scars, I carry my love even more. It's what keeps me warm in the chill of the evening. So before I go, I want to leave you with this. Cherish the quiet moments, the small acts of kindness, the soft voices of those who love you in ways words can't always say. And don't be afraid to be brave, to forgive, to dream, to love even when it feels like you've got nothing left to give. And sometimes, just sometimes, when you least expect it, life has a way of circling back round. Maybe that love you lost, or the dream you gave up, is sitting right there beside you, waiting for you to notice. I reckon that's a kind of magic worth holding on to. Thank you for sitting with me today, darling. It means more than words can say. Now, tell me, what's the one lesson you've been too afraid to learn? What's the story you haven't told yet? I'd be mighty interested to hear. Because, you see, that's how we keep our hearts alive, by sharing the stories that shape us. And maybe, just maybe, by listening to each other, we find the courage to be a little more ourselves. So tell me, do you believe true love always comes back? Sometimes, I think it does. And sometimes, I think it's been here all along.